But to begin, before we have the speech in Latvian, we had the question about what is the situation in the country. So it was really useful this morning to have that panel of people talking very specifically about some of the situations that have arisen in other countries across the north of Europe, at least. So now we move to Rod Schwartz. Rod is the chief executive of an organization called ClearlySo, which is a leading United Kingdom firm in raising capital for business and the funds that create social impact. And lots of organizations claim to be the leader. Rod, I think, can sit comfortably in the fact that ClearlySo actually is the leader. And Rod has an interesting perspective on this because he comes from a background in equities and investment banking, so brings all of that kind of experience and inside know-how into his work at ClearlySo. And he, as it says on his CV, he transitioned into venture capital. I'll ask him at some point what that means. I think that just means you change jobs. But he currently advises the leading UK social enterprises such as the HCT Group, which you should Google, the Ethical Property Company, who are a very interesting outfit, and he lectures at the Said Business School in Oxford and NIT in Hamburg in Germany. And he's the chair of something called Space Hive. And I will say this, because he said, don't over-egg the pudding, which is a phrase, I don't know if that translates. I'm looking at the interpreters, whether that translates into Latvian. But it means don't make too much of it. But Rod is genuinely one of the good guys, one of the people who looks for solutions, looks for ways to support the social economy and social enterprises from a very particular perspective. I will end with the fact we've discovered this morning we have something in common, which is we were both at religious schools, different religions, but both at religious schools. We're both expelled, sent away from those schools when we were 15, same age. He for shouting and swearing, I think, at a religious teacher and then leaving the room, and me for punching a priest. So, and we then discovered, to even more kind of weird, our mothers then made up a story saying this wasn't true for both of us. And so it's very odd when you discover that, when you think you're going to be an utter failure, it turns out to be not so bad.
Wow. I guess it just means that people who come into social enterprise are people who tend to get expelled when they're 15. It's something about not wanting to do things the way they're done. I was going to speak from the podium, but I really worry about the people here. So you're all in the dark. Can you see if people sit in the podium? Because you're all, is that okay? All right. Maybe I'll do that. So anyway, thank you. Where's the Zorch that moves things? Up there? Right? Okay. I feel like a talk show host, sort of scampering about. Right. Well, I was asked to speak. Does this work too? Okay. I'll use that when I just go over there to the left to make sure that... I'm going to use this, Michael.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
You need to turn it off if you're using that, otherwise you'll get...
Okay. I'll come over there from time to time just to make sure you're all awake. And also, just, prepare your questions, because I'm one of those really embarrassing people that if I don't get questions afterwards, I'll start going to the audience and pointing to you and say, what's on your mind, especially if I know you. So consider yourself warned. I'm going to talk about investors, because that's what I've been asked to talk about, and what they're doing in social enterprise. But first, I'm still getting the feedback. Do you hear feedback? Can we deal with? All right, let's see if it goes away. So I'm going to set the scene on social impact investing and talk specifically about what drives investors, because I guess the investment market is considered to be relatively advanced in the UK, and I'll give you some perspectives on that if that's all right. First, just a little bit on my background. I'm going to introduce myself today, tell you a little bit about myself, give you a sense of a geopolitical background, I guess, to what's happening in the social enterprise and investment area. I'm going to offer some thoughts on what people are calling either social investment if you're European or impact investment if you're American. Give you some examples of some of the enterprises that we are involved in. Look at different types of investors and talk to you a little bit about what the investors themselves are looking for, because obviously you may have a great idea, but if you can't raise any money, you can't go anywhere, even if it's 1,100 euros. Now, that can get you started. And finally, talk a little bit about what ClearlySo actually does, because a number of you have asked me, but I won't spend very much time on a commercial message. Anything I've missed? Is there anything that you'd like to hear me talk about that I haven't commented on? Anything? Case studies. We'll do lots of case studies, I promise. Okay? And also, we're going to leave time for questions. So, okay, that wasn't a question. That was just a conversation. I just want to give you some caveats and some of my hidden agendas. So, my background is a practical one. So I don't have an NGO background. I'll tell you my background in a second. But what I'm going to do is combine sort of the theory and the practice. So I do lecture, but it's all based on practical experience with probably thousands of social enterprises over the last 15 years. And that's the time in which I've been involved. I should say that my view is predominantly UK. Even though I sound to you like an American, I'm not really in any way an American. I left the United States. I was thrown out of America. No, I wasn't thrown out of America. But I left the United States 27 years ago. So my experience is really a European experience. Although I have traveled quite a lot around continental Europe, so I have some examples that aren't just British. Also, this is just my own thing. So I do think there's something about people who get expelled in social investment and enterprise. I think that it's something about refusing to accept the world as it is. You just look at it and you say, this is shit. We have to do something better. And actually, it's that personal search of mine from a world that I wasn't very happy with to a world I'm a little more happy with that I think is behind what I'm doing here in the social enterprise area. And also, I have an agenda. So, for those of you who are involved, great. For those of you who are not involved, I'm going to try to get you more involved. So I'm not in any way objective here. This is my career history. All of these, the firms on it, interestingly enough, all of these firms don't exist anymore. So I'd like to think that's not, yeah, exactly. I'd like to think that's not causal, but it's a comment maybe on capitalism and the slash and burn attitude of capitalism and what's changed. So Payne Webber became part of UBS, so it was acquired. I was an analyst there. Lehman Brothers, you all know, Lehman Brothers brought down the Western financial system, or nearly did, but I left in '97. BNP Paribas, I was an investment banker at. I was sort of pretending to be an investment banker at there. And then I transitioned into Catalyst, which is a venture capital firm. There's a story about that, which I won't go into now, but if any of you want to, I can tell you about that over lunch. It has to do with a Finnish guy and his persuasiveness. Anyway, we can talk about that. But then in 2008, I formed this company called ClearlySo, but actually been involved in the field since 1999. So my background is really that of somebody who worked in investment banking and then venture capital and then this unique enterprise called ClearlySo. So I don't have an NGO background. I don't have a social background. I have a background which has given me a tremendous amount of guilt, and now I'm trying to assuage that guilt, okay? I just want to first, before I go into kind of a little bit more information, let me move around a bit because I'm getting nervous. Can you hear me? Okay. I'd like to give you a perspective on how I see the social economy, because I think there's a kind of political perspective which I think is really important. And it's about how we want to live our lives. It's about what system we think is most appropriate for the world in which we want to live in. And these systems are not divinely ordained. So the way we live isn't something that comes from God. It's something that we can make. These are systems that are guiding our welfare. So I want to give you a perspective on this. So we talk about a sustainability crisis, and this is a traditional view. The world's about to end, the environment's collapsing, etc. I want to give you a slightly different perspective on the way I see the world right now. Because I think it's not just the environmental system which is near collapse. We have other systems that are near collapse. It's the environment. The financial system did collapse, so it's not a question of is it near collapsing. The financial system collapsed, and if it wasn't for the taxpayers who bailed out the world's largest banks, the whole system would have broken down. But we also have institutional collapse. I'm not familiar with the situation in Latvia, although I look forward to hearing from the president. But I do throughout the West, we have politicians in utter disregard, I think very deservedly in disregard. You know, the church, the media, the police, the military, all of these systems are rightly being disregarded because they're shown to be in many regards corrupt and not looking after our best interests. And then obviously things are breaking down within our families. And in general, we have widespread signs of social unrest. So anybody who thinks things are working well is crazy. We have, though, three systems that tend to give us what we think we want. The first of those I would describe as the governmental model. So this is what I call the governmental model. And this is a picture that I just thought was funny. Although obviously Nicolas Sarkozy and Berlusconi on the far left, or oddly enough on the far left, are gone now. And some of these other people will be gone shortly. But this is the governmental model. In the governmental model, we all earn income, we pay our taxes, and they supposedly give us what we want. But it's really not working in the West. It's not working because we're not really prepared to pay the taxes that are necessary to have all the things we want. Government colludes with us in refusing to make hard choices. And actually, it's not working because the system is costly to citizens. Many of the governments lack democratic support. Many of the politicians, so those colorful figures you saw on the picture, some are corrupt, many are incompetent, many behave undemocratically, and the system of tax and spend, or the government model as a way of getting what we want, is not faring very, very well. I also think of politicians as like the parents in a dysfunctional family. So by law and by morality, they have the responsibility to look after their children, but they simply don't. They're either incapable of it or just don't because they have other interests that they want to put forward. So this system of the governmental approach to getting what we want isn't working. And one of the problems is that when we give our taxes in, we're not really sure what's going to come out the other end. We want to support government with taxes, but maybe we're going to get a Trident missile or a nuclear missile of some sort, something we don't want or need, or more defense spending, or all these other things. If you go into the charity model, that's another way of getting what we want. We donate money to charity. Supposedly, if we give money to the charity, we're going to get something that we want out the other end. And in fact, the charity model is connected. So when I give money to Cancer Research UK, at least I imagine some of it, I hope, will find its way to curing cancer. But the problem with the charity model is that it's really ineffective at times. It can be very, very inefficient. And actually, in the current fiscal climate, many of you, talked about we get EU support, we get EU support, we get EU support, we get EU support. I mean, governmental support is on the wane in a lot of Western economies. So actually, this is becoming less and less sustainable. So there's a greater connectedness in the charity model, but actually it's not very efficient, and it doesn't work terribly well, and it looks in the UK anyway like it will work less well over time. Am I going too fast? I should just look at you. I'm okay, maybe a bit. Okay, I'll slow down. Thank you. Now, this was very popular with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and people like that. They said, no. All those things aren't going to work. We need to have the power of business deliver to us what we really want and need, because only business is capable of doing that. And in fact, business is a very powerful mechanism, and the capitalist system, does harness resources very efficiently. But this doesn't really work terribly well either. We find that it's really unbalanced in terms of objectives. It puts profit above people and above everything else. And actually, it generates some substantial negative externalities. For those of you who don't know and can't translate what a negative externality is, an externality is a really bad thing that gets passed off onto society for free. So think of a polluting chemical manufacturer. Yes, they make chemicals, but also they pollute the rivers and the skies. Think of the banking system. Yes, there's an intermediation of money, but at the same time, the banking system collapsed the global economy. That's a negative externality is a polite way to describe that. But these are negative externalities that are passed on from business. And they're much less sustainable than we thought. So the banking system would have collapsed if the taxpayers hadn't bailed it out. That's appalling. And heavily subsidized by the state. And in fact, in many countries, businesses, instead of competing fairly, use politicians and the subsidies provided by politicians to secure for themselves things that they can't get in the marketplace. So actually, this model doesn't work terribly well. And it's with these three models in mind that I think social enterprise and social investment have come about. They're kind of a way of using the sort of power of capitalism and financial markets, but in a way where society doesn't suffer, where people lie at the center of what it is that the companies are about, and I think it's much more sustainable in the long term. And I know my children and people the same age as my children, largely you all in the audience, all recognize that this is a system that has more long-term viability than some of these others. Let's move on. This is this model. We call it a new enterprise and investment model. I'll tell you a little bit about language in a second. I noticed a lot of language in the panel that I just... This is the traditional view. So you have on the top, and this is sort of from an academic presentation, so you'll bear with me. This is by type of organization. You'll see on your far left, charities with grant income, going all the way to a very commercial enterprise. I can't quite see it here, but the middle 4 or 5 boxes are gray, and that gray zone is what we're talking about when we talk about social investment and social enterprise. These are organizations that have like a charity, but with a little mission. So maybe Shelter, a UK homeless charity, has shops. Social benefit enterprise and a social purpose business. The Body Shop might be an example of that. Then a socially responsible business, so Unilever might be an example. Then a business that generates lots of profits but gives some of it away to charity because they feel a bit bad. And then a regular company. And here's another way of looking at it by type of investment. So you have on the one hand here on your right, fully commercial assets, so these are normal investments. And on the other hand, donations over here on the left. And then everything in the middle is the area that we're interested in. But actually, and this is going to be controversial, and I hope it causes some problems and some questions, we at ClearlySo have thrown away some of these terms. In fact, quite a lot of these terms. So we have now things that we say. We talk about high-impact businesses, disruptive businesses, extraordinary entrepreneurs, impact-centered funds. We talk about 3D investing, and I'll talk about that in a second. We talk about risk, return, and impact. We talk a lot about externalities. But these are the things we don't talk about anymore. We don't use the words social business, social enterprise, social investing, social entrepreneur, the sector, impact as an asset class. Now, I know that that's controversial, and I've just listened to 7 excellent people talk about how you need to build the knowledge of social entrepreneurship and create a culture of social investment. But we have, at ClearlySo, a real concern about that. We think that it's like saying, well, here's this trivial little backwater, this meaningless corner of the world here. You know, if you thought about it from the standpoint of this stage, it would be this little corner here. That's social. That's really cute. We'll have a bit of that. But the rest of the world can carry on as it is. And I think there's a flaw in that thinking. I think that if we are going to succeed in changing the world so that my children and your grandchildren are going to live in a better world than this one, we have to make the whole stage social. So to talk about a social enterprise as if it's something else, something that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the economy, I think makes no sense, and we think is contrary to the purpose of developing a social economy. We want the entire economy to be social. We want all investment to take 3 dimensions into account, not just 2 dimensions of risk and financial return. We think the whole economy has to think about 3D, 3-dimensional investing, where every single investment is looked at from the standpoint of risk, financial return, and social impact. And until that starts to happen, we think you're lost. Or think about a country like Chad. Right? If you're in Chad, you're not going to get all head up about whether the return is 3% plus 1%. Any business in Chad that is creating employment and isn't about prostitution or gun running is probably a social business, isn't it? If it makes bricks, if it makes jam, it's a social business because it's generating massive social impact in a country that desperately needs it. So we've challenged the lexicon, and I hope we have a debate with you on that in the Q&A period. And I think she's very cute, so I didn't want to take this slide out of the presentation. What is social anyway? I mean, what is social? Do you all know this HSBC ad? I like this HSBC ad because when you fly, it's kind of like, what's good and what's bad? So some people think, oh, fruit's really good, cake is bad. But if you're like me, you think, pear or whatever fruit that was. But that's good. So it's kind of it's a very personal thing, isn't it? Or here's another example. This is a social enterprise from Thailand. It's called Cabbages and Condoms. And its purpose is to help people develop better sexual health habits in Thailand. Because Thailand saw that AIDS was spreading across the country. And they thought that if they make the idea of condoms more funny, and they joked about it, that all the seriousness around using condoms would start to dissipate. And this is actually a hotel they run in Thailand where they charge Westerners a fortune, and as a result, they have profits that they can then use for giving away their condoms, actually. But some people who don't like the idea of sexual promiscuity think that's bad. I think that's good. But they're not wrong, and I'm not right. We all have different views. You may have a religious background and feel very strongly about sexual promiscuity, for example, or booze, for example. I happen to think it's good. You may think it's bad. That's perfectly fine. But when you're in the social realm, things get really complicated. These are employee-owned companies. Lochfine Restaurants in the UK, John Lewis Partnerships. You know, whether a company is owned by the employees or not, some people think of as social. I happen to think of it as social too. And then we have this tricky one called the cooperative, which used to be one of the largest social businesses in the UK. And most people thought of it as social. It's owned by its customers, allegedly. But then, over the last few years, we've had every sort of scandal. Drugs, sex, misuse of funds, etc. And in fact, actually, the company almost went bankrupt. It had a banking division, which was mismanaged by corrupt, stupid, incompetent people. And so I don't think that's a social business anymore, even though they're still called the cooperative bank. So what is social? There's a point here about entrepreneurs in the social realm or in the impact space or whatever you want to say. I think that to be a social entrepreneur, if you want to call it that, means that you have certain restrictions. There's some things you can't do. There's some things you won't do to make a profit. And people are like, oh, I'm a social entrepreneur. Or maybe like you were saying, I've forgotten your name, or Jan. I'm social. But actually, there are some real advantages that come with that. You have legitimacy and moral authority that you don't have as a conventional entrepreneur. You get a lot of publicity. You're able to sell your products at higher prices. And for example, does anybody in the audience buy any fair trade products? Anybody buy any fair trade products? So actually, almost all of you, well, about half of you have raised your hand. The fact is you're paying 27% more for something that isn't any better than the other thing. So the chocolate isn't going to be better, the coffee isn't going to be better, there's no health benefits. You're only paying more money because that product speaks to your ethical preferences. That's all. And you're acting in an economically irrational way, aren't you, when you buy something fair trade? But it's because you care about that social impact. You care about that. So that's why I say social businesses or social enterprises actually can sell products at higher prices. They get more publicity. And this is critical, they get access to below market rate capital. So the businesses that we find money for sometimes get money more cheaply than other people get money. So there are so many advantages. So instead of, oh, I'm a poor social entrepreneur, nobody loves me, actually, you have a lot of advantages that you can leverage. Let's talk about that. So first of all, remember I talked about 3D investing. I want to just give you the background to that. This is the world I grew up in the 1980s. It was the world of two-dimensional investing, where risk and return was everything in the financial markets, and that was all that mattered, and that was all people cared about. What kind of trade-off am I getting between risk and return? I contend to you, and my background is financial, and I'm telling you that the world is shifting to a three-dimensional world. The world is becoming where normal investors are starting to say, actually, I really have to take social impact into account. Sometimes they have to take it into account because the long term becomes the short term. For example, if you manufactured cigarettes, eventually people realized that you were selling products to people that you knew were harmful and you shouldn't have been doing it. And the long term became the short term. You were hit with billions of fines. Or you were a bank and you were stuffing your clients with products that were inappropriate, expensive, and you didn't tell them what was inside the products. Banks have spent $295 billion in fines since the financial crisis for all the negative externalities that they were generating. 209. Why didn't they just behave better? Idiots. I could go on, and there are more and more examples of this. Or McDonald's, who makes children obese. Or. You get the picture. So energy companies, which pollute the atmosphere, CO2 emissions, etc. Investors are starting to think about the social impact of what they're doing. And here's a company, which actually Michael mentioned, Ethical Property Company. Has anybody heard of the Ethical Property Company other than Michael? One, two hands, okay. Ethical Property Company is a very simple company. What they do is they buy buildings, commercial office buildings, and they rent those buildings to social change organizations. Oxfam, Greenpeace, people like that, okay? And they give them a cheaper deal, they give them a better deal, they run the buildings in a more environmentally sustainable way, and you think, well, actually, if they have to buy the buildings at the same price, and then they have to do all this other stuff, how do they make it work? They make it work because they raise money at below market rates. They have gone out to the market in the United Kingdom. They have raised, so far, something like £40 million. And they say, right on the cover, you will not do as well as you would do in a normal investment if you invest in us. But people like you, who buy fair trade coffee, also buy shares in Ethical Property Company. And actually, you could buy shares tomorrow if you wanted. So that's an example of a clear 3D investment. It doesn't give you the same risk-adjusted rate of return, but it gives you significant social impact. And they're spreading across Europe. I'll give you some examples from our portfolio. So Michael already mentioned HCT Group. How am I doing on time, by the way? Okay? Maybe I'll hasten the pace a bit. You'll look at me, Ava, if I'm really going. Is that all right? Okay. HCT Group is a bus company. It was a failing bus company in Hackney. That's why it's called HCT, Hackney Community Transport. And the community said, it's really crap that this local authority is running this bus company so badly. We're going to take over the bus company, run it as a charity, and run it properly. That was in 1982. It was run very successfully. It's now profitable. It's probably one of the largest social enterprises in the United Kingdom. It has 800 staff, which it really invests in. It runs the buses in a cleaner and greener way. It takes 35% of their profits and donates it to good causes in the local community. And we're delighted to be supporting them. And we found them capital at below market rates. People wanted to invest in a company that was doing such good things. If you are all doing good things as social entrepreneurs, I believe there are investors out there who will give you capital more cheaply than if you were running a normal enterprise. Weeding Tech is kind of a cool company. Just to give you an example of the differences, Weeding Tech is a company that makes a tech for weeding, surprisingly enough. You see that chap over there? He's spraying. I don't know what he's doing, actually. It looks like he's spraying pavement. But what Weeding Tech does is it makes a high-temperature hose that kills weeds. Really simple. And actually, we think of it as a social investment. But it means that you don't have to use insecticides to kill weeds. So it's a very simple technology. And actually, it has some really interesting investors. I'm going to say this name, and you're all going to go, oh, God. But Roman Abramovich is one of the investors in this company. And you may say evil capital, horrible God, whatever. I mean, we don't see our job as actually, if it's legal capital and it can be put to good purpose, that's fine with us. We didn't find him as an investor, but we raised, I think, £900,000 for that company, and he was one of the co-investors. Framework is a social enterprise based in Nottingham, which is in the middle of the UK. Framework helps homeless people only. And it does two things. First of all, it kind of sweeps them off the floor when they're living really homeless, and it puts them into shelters, and it cleans them up. And then as they develop confidence, they give them what is called move-on accommodation. And this is accommodation or home that is kind of before you want to have the homeless person go back into society. Framework came to us and said, we'd like to build 120 of these units, but we don't have the money for it. Could you find funding, £12 million, can you find funding for those units so that we can house these homeless people? And we were able to find funding, again, at less than a market rate. It'll be around 5% or so for those units so that they can help 120 homeless people back into society. And we saw one of their clients talk, to a group of investors. And it was really interesting because they were one of 5 presentations. And all the other people came and gave very polished presentations. And the guy from Framework got up and he said, look, I'm not going to say much. We'd really like you to invest £12 million in our business. And then this chap, who was one of the homeless people, got up and was shaking and just said that this had completely changed his life. And then he sat down. And that was the most successful pitch on the night. Because that story of that individual whose life would have been ended, I think, were it not for Framework, told the whole story of social impact investment much better than somebody like me or somebody like the chap from Framework. And by the way, it's not always about sacrifice. People think there's a seesaw. More social impact, less financial return. Baloney. It doesn't have to be that way. I'll start on the top right. Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Better ice cream, better looking after people, all that sort of stuff. They sold to Unilever for $350 million. Tom Shoes. Every time you buy a shoe in the United States, Tom sends a shoe to the developing country, a pair of shoes, not a shoe, a pair of shoes. He just sold half his business to Bain Capital for $625 million. And half of what he got, he's now investing in other social businesses. The Body Shop, I think of as a social business, completely changed the way we look at product manufacturing. The garage owner invested £8,000 for 50% of the company, which was sold to L'Oreal for £652 million. That's a good business. And Just Giving, I'm proud to say I'm an investor in. Just Giving is actually the world's largest online charitable giving platform. Started with about £6 million of investment, and it's now worth 150 to 200 million pounds. So actually, if you do something that is social, but also run your business well, and give something to people what they want, you may actually be able to do well at the same time as you do good. I really am running out of time. These are a host of other earlier stage companies that we've supported. Aduna makes beauty products out of baobab fruit in West Africa. Exosect makes a compound that reduces insecticide use. Psychology Online provides psychology online. In Britain, that's very important because in Britain, people don't like to talk to people face to face, but they'd rather talk about psychological problems online. I can say that because I'm American. Now, what drives investors? First of all, who are the investors? So there's 5 different types of investors. There's governmental investors from a single country. There's MFIs, so multilateral financial institutions. Institutional investors, what I call award givers. And investors. Individual investors. It's very important that people come to us. The most common question I get asked is, what are your investors looking for? There isn't one investor type. And if you ask the question that way, you're missing the point on people who might invest in your company. They're all different, just like you all are different. Let's look at so here are some of the single country investors. So there are some direct investment funds. So we have examples from Australia and from the UK. Then there are funds whose sole purpose is to build the market in their country. Big Society Capital has £600 million. Its only job is to help social investment take off in the United Kingdom. So what they're looking for are high-impact infrastructural investments. And then there are some single-country international development funds. Many of these you know. The way these funds are going to act might be a little bit like these funds, which are multinational financial institutions, EIF, UN, etc. But they're going to be very different than some of these institutional investors. So you may have impact-oriented funds like Acumen Social Venture Fund from Germany, Bridges from the UK, LGT from, I guess, really, Liechtenstein. They're going to be very different from AXA, who are just looking for a product that their clients want that will give them some impact but a decent return. And they're going to be different from Deutsche Bank, which is just feeling really guilty and set up a fund because they wanted to say they were doing something good. So they set up a £10 million fund, and now they're doing a bit of good stuff with it. But it's not corporate greenwash. But what it is the CSR project. And that's very different from Waltham Forest. Waltham Forest is a local authority in the UK which is concerned about employment in the area of Waltham Forest. What they're looking for is employment-generating social enterprises. And they're all going to be very different from foundations, Kellogg, Bertelsmann, Esme Fairbairn, etc. So all investors are different. And in fact, even within an institution, you'll have different people with different objects, their own selfish objects as well. And housing associations. We have these award givers. You know some of them. Skoll from eBay Money, Klaus Schwab in Switzerland, the Global Social Venture Competition, SEF. I mean, there's lots of people who give awards. And obviously, if you're applying for those awards, they're looking for different things than institutional investors. And then, and this is really driving the market right now in the UK, individual investors, people who have become rich, and they've made their own money, and they know they're supposed to give to charity, but it's painful for them to give to charity. They feel, oh, God, I know I should, but I don't really want to. And what social enterprises do is give them an opportunity to make investments, to back organizations like themselves, entrepreneurs that they can kind of resonate with. And actually, that's really driving things. They sometimes act on their own. They sometimes act through what are called family offices. They very often act through private banks, and these are banks that look after their wealth. Then they, in the UK, act through IFAs, independent financial advisors. But the point, I'm not going to bore you all with this. I'm looking at the audience, and I can tell you, like, oh, God. But look, when you go out and look for money, it's really important that you understand the organizational construct of that investor, that you understand what the incentives are of the individual that you're actually trying to convince. Because if you don't understand their motivations, they're not going to invest in you. So each and every one of them, you have to really do research on them and try to understand what they're really looking for. And don't give them a presentation which describes accurately what you do. I mean, fine, you can do that, but you have to actually meet a need that they find, like you did when you won that award. And then, obviously, this is really big in the UK, is crowdfunding. I mentioned Just Giving before, but Kiva, Kickstarter, Crowdcube, etc. These are the organizations that are going to find you the money from millions. And where does their money come from, actually? So if you think about all the institutions, all the types that I met, there's one thing to remember, that ultimately all the money comes from you and me. Governmental money comes from you and me. Institutional money comes from our pension funds or our insurance assets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through, I was going to go through a little bit more detail on what drives investors. I was going to go quickly through what ClearlySo does, because some of you are thinking, what the hell does this guy do? We know what he used to do, and that was no good. So what is he doing now? I'll tell you this briefly. So this is the chasm that you as entrepreneurs have to cross. There was a book written by some famous writer, whose name I forgot, called Crossing the Chasm. Every entrepreneur has to cross the chasm from insignificance and pain into success, and that's the chasm. And if you're a social entrepreneur, an impact entrepreneur, you're trying to do that. One of the things you need to help you cross that chasm is is investors. And we've just talked about all those investors and what they can do for you. And ClearlySo has a very, very, very simple role. We're there to speak your language and to speak the language of investors and help investors to cross the chasm. And all we do, and we've helped about 50 or 60 social enterprises so far, raise either a few £100,000 or a few £1,000,000 so that they can cross the chasm. And that's it. And by the way, any of you who are thinking, how can I get in touch or whatever, and think of something, just write me. I mean, I'm very accessible, and if you write me in my office, I'd be really keen to help. Because I've really enjoyed coming here. This is a pleasure for me to now be back after 4 years. As a corporate objective, we're very interested in extending what we do only into continental Europe. We have no interest in North America, no interest in Asia, no interest in Africa. We're just focused on Europe. So if any of you have ideas, please get in touch, and thank you for your time and patience. Do we have time for questions? We have to have a couple. Remember, I'm going to point if you don't raise your hand and ask. Yes?
Jurgita from Lithuania, Organization Best Wishes, because we actually have a very similar idea to be a bridge between social enterprises or NGOs and investors. I'm not sure if we got your idea good from the beginning. You said that you are looking skeptical to impact measurement, but what exactly you sell to investors, how you measure impact of those social enterprises?
If I suggested I was skeptical about, I don't remember where in my presentation I talked about it. The truth is, I actually am skeptical, but you must have read my mind because I didn't have that in the presentation. Let me tell you why I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical because when you have to measure impact, it costs, in the UK, £30,000. And then if you have to harness internal resources, it costs you another £30,000. So a struggling social enterprise has to spend £50,000 or £60,000 to do something that is very expensive, which nobody ever reads. And I think that's a really big waste of money. I think social entrepreneurs have to focus on becoming successful entrepreneurs. So I am skeptical only because the cost is so high and because there's no clear... I think the best social impact assessments that I see are the ones that are really simple. So if you do this, just measure this and give me a simple measure and spend 10 minutes on it a year, and I'm very happy. Does that answer your question?
Enough for investors? Is it enough? Like just simple measurement methods?
And that gets back to finding out. So if your investors are new and the investors are inexperienced, they all insist on a report which costs £50,000 or £60,000, which is a waste of time and money and effort. Thank you. But you have to do it. But if you have more experienced social investors, just look at them in the eye and say, come on, what do you really want me to measure? And they'll say, actually, we really want to measure your impact on disabled people. So you say, okay, this is our impact and this is how we'll measure it. Done. And it doesn't cost you any money. And that's what I urge you to do. But some people, they're cowards, they're sheep, they follow what everybody else is doing, so they'll make you do some stupid report. And that's just the way it is.
So now we know that if Rod had come yesterday, this whole 2-day conference, which is about the impact of social return on investment, is shit, we needn't be here. So...
The point, so I'm not saying impact isn't important. You're all entrepreneurs who are delivering social impact. I'm not saying the impact is not important. What I'm saying is spending a lot of money, wasting a lot of time to measure something that is very straightforward, that's what you should be focusing on, not the expense. That's what I meant.
Thank you very much. We feel vindicated now.
Any other questions? Do I have time? Yes? Oh.
Hello, my name is Eva. So you were mentioning that basically it would be good that all companies would have the social impact. This is the way it has to be. So I think the social entrepreneurs, these are the companies that put it in the front line, and that's why we try to promote, that's why we all sit here, we are the social entrepreneurs, and we put it in the front line. So I'm wondering, is it, in your opinion, important that we have this separate framework for the social enterprise, that we have this legislation and normatives and measurement and all, et cetera, to kind of put it in the front line, in the face, yes, these are the social entrepreneurs and this is what I try to advocate for?
Yeah, but that's a very interesting question because it could very well be that at the stage where you are in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, I'm not so sure about Sweden and Denmark, but that maybe creating vehicles to raise the profile of this sector are useful. That's one thing. And secondly, maybe you need the social enterprise legal structure in some form to operate that way. Actually, in another backward market called the United States, you also had to do that, because in the United States, you either were a charity or you were a profit-making company. You know how Americans are. They have only white hats and black hats. There's no gray hats in cowboy movies. I'm mixing metaphors, but you know what I mean. So they needed to create a structure. But actually, in some of the more developed markets, in some of the European markets, you have many, many, many shades of gray. And actually, once you have those shades of gray, which I think it becomes a waste of time to spend a lot of time and money and effort and pain and anguish and ego worrying about precise definitions. I think then what you have to do, once social enterprise has a place in the debate, I think what you then have to do is move on and try to make all companies social. And you have to try to get all companies to measure their social impact inexpensively and generate social impact. And actually, I think that would be the way to change society much more quickly than when we create an artificial barrier. Because otherwise, social enterprise will just stay that little corner on the end of the stage, and it won't enter the mainstream. So maybe, Eva, it is important in the beginning to have these debates and discussions, but then as quickly as possible, talk about how to engage with the mainstream, how to bring along the mainstream, etc. Is that helpful at all? Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Black hats, white hats issue that's at the moment making much trouble in social enterprise and impact investing communities, whether 100% of the profits has to be reinvested or not. And for example, in the UK, Unlimited and Southend from Scotland broke up their cooperation between them. But my question is, what in your view should be the next step forward in impact investing community that such kind of discussions would not actually hinder the progress of the whole sector?
Yeah. Thank you, Jan. That's a great question. Without getting into the details of what happened in the UK, this debate, the question is, how much is it acceptable for a social entrepreneur to earn, or for investors in social entrepreneurs to get as a return? And that's a very, very fair question. I think it was it? No, it wasn't you. It was you, I think, who talked about in Sweden this 3% plus 1%. Was that you? Yeah. So everybody has. I really struggle with that. So, and we found that we were struggling with that as a firm, and we really care a lot about consistency. So it felt to me that something is social, and then at some percentage, it's not. So if a company gives 50% of its profits back to, in the business, etc., that had been the definition in the UK. But then at 49%, it's not. And I thought, God, isn't that a trivial difference? Is that really meaningful? But this has become a very big issue. I guess what I think is that every entrepreneur has an entrepreneurial idea. Sometimes that entrepreneurial idea can be funded in the mainstream. If you were running The Body Shop, or Just Giving, or Tom's Shoes, your access to capital will be greatly enhanced if you can be a commercial enterprise. And the social impact and the financial impact will be correlated. There are some entrepreneurial ideas where you will never be commercially viable, in which case you need more access to charitable capital. If you want to access charitable or foundation or impact capital, then you have to structure limitations. So what I think is, have your entrepreneurial ideas and then figure out how you attract the capital that you need to attract for that idea. And that's what should then determine. We give 50% of our profits, 15%, 75, 100, whatever. But don't start with a rule and then build a business. Start with a business, figure out how you're going to investment, and then put in place the minimum rules that give you continued flexibility. Does that make any sense?
I'm just curious, or your view on the collaborative economy. And I think is it an ongoing discussion about investment there?
I mean, I'm in favor of it, but I don't know, Bertola, what you'd like me to say. So what?
Airbnb or Uber, these sharing platforms, circular economy.
Well, I think it's true that in our economy we waste an enormous amount, whether it's the houses we buy and own but don't live in, or whether it's power tools that we pay £85 for and use once every 5 years, or in my case, never. I mean, it's absurd, but that's the consumerist society we live in. So I think it's great to think about, because society has to start to think about how we can use less stuff and how we can make less stuff, because ultimately this stuff-oriented economy we've created is just going to ruin the planet for our children. So I'm very in favor of it. But some of those models, I think, are better than others, and some of them are more genuinely social than others. But I didn't want to get drawn into a specific question. She looks very keen. Can she ask one last question? Oh, Michael.
No, just to add a different perspective. I made a very similar point in a meeting in Tunisia. And there was a Chinese guy who could have stood up and was quite charming, but said, you know what? You've been screwing the world for the last 200 years. Now it's our turn. Don't tell me to consume less, which was really interesting.
But I think he has a moral point on his side. He's like, you've misbehaved for centuries. Give us a few decades of misbehavior. I mean, I think I get the philosophical logic of his point, but what we see is that people in Beijing are choking from the fog. So I think it's short-sighted. I think we have to consume less, and they have to consume less too.
Actually, this is a bit connected to my question, because I wanted to ask you about your personal change. What happened, actually, that you decided to be, that you converted from being a shark of business to social enterprise supporter? It's very interesting, because in Poland, I can see that it's 25 years of free market. So also people in Poland, they are like, we started to get money, we started to make money, so it's the same. I go to the entrepreneurs and I say to them, now you should be solidar with the others, and they said to me, blah, 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 it's my time. This is my question.
It's a great question. Can I give a longish answer?
Yeah, but then it's the last one.
Okay. Because I think so people say, yeah, it's all right for you, but you spent 20 years making all this money, and now you can kind of do all this other stuff. Well, to make you feel better, I can say that I've spent 15 years now in this world, and I've more or less spent all the money that I made. So I'm now having, like the rest of you, to borrow to live. But that isn't the answer to your question. There's a couple of answers I have. So I didn't have what Michael reminds me is a moment of Damascene conversion, or conversion on the road to Damascus. For me, it took a long time to make this what I describe as my journey from the dark side. So, I don't think I was a shark, but I'm sure I worked at shark-like institutions. And actually, I think I learned a lot at those shark-like institutions. So when I teach at Oxford and people say, okay, what should I do? Start a career in social finance or start a career at Morgan Stanley? I have to really struggle and think before I answer. Because actually, Morgan Stanley will teach you some really good skills that are very important that you can then use. The problem is, once you go to Morgan Stanley and have a family and a big house and all those responsibilities, you never see, you always put all, I'll be ethical one day, and one day I'll be, and it never happens. And that's what happens with most people. So I don't have a really good answer for it. I think each of us as individuals has to determine what is the right career path, what is the right balance of doing well and doing good, and all that sort of thing. But I'll tell you my story. So my story was that I was a very successful equity research analyst for many years, and my wife and I were living in New York, and we thought, well, this is about as good as it gets, but this isn't really very good. So we didn't have an idea. We just said, let's get out of America, and we came to Europe. And then I did other things in Europe, and I went up and up in the investment banking world, and I just felt continually unhappy. I mean, not that things weren't going well, but I just felt something was missing. And then when my children got to be of a certain age, and they started to say, well, Dad, you tell us all this stuff that is important in life, but what do you do? And I would say, well, I'm an investment banker. And I realized that there was such a dichotomy between what I told my children was important in the world, and what I did was so great that I had to just stop. So I just quit, and I didn't know what to do, and then I just tried 100 different things. I got involved in politics. I got involved in the charitable sector. I got involved in all these things. And then I got involved in that business called Just Giving. I became the first chairman of Just Giving. And I thought, this is it. This is what I have to spend my life doing. I have to spend my life taking all the skills I've acquired in these evil companies, or call them what you will, and I have to apply them to create 100 Just Givings, 100 businesses that change the world while they run as good businesses. And that became my life. But it was a very slow, gradual process that took maybe 15 or 20 years, and that's the honest answer. I don't know what to give you as far as advice goes. I think you all have to find out for yourselves what the right balance is between making money and doing good and all that. The reassuring thing is that if you're anything like all the other people I know who are your age, you're thinking in a more balanced way than the people did at my age when we just thought about money.
Okay. We are going to take one because we're eating into Andres' time. One last short question and a short answer.
Very short answer.
A short answer.
I promise.
Well, I'm happy to say that I'm not making a question. I'm actually just making a point. No, I didn't lie. I said it's a tiny one. What I wanted to say or share, an information I have, is about a student organization Rod Schwartz may have heard about, which is 80,000 Hours, which was founded by a group of Oxford students. And it looks or promotes a discussion on the ways in which to spend the approximately 80,000 hours we work during our lifetime in the most meaningful and efficient way. I'm not saying they're giving the best advice, but I do think that the discussion they are promoting could be very useful and interesting for the people in this room. Thank you.
Well, that's great, and that answers the question. I mean, I think you do have to take a lifetime perspective on this. That's a really great intervention, so thank you. Thank you all very much for your patience, and please grab me. I'll be around the next day or two, and if there's anything... Oh, that's right! I'm going to teach a workshop this afternoon, and then there's a workshop tomorrow as well. So you'll be sick of me if you're not already.
Thank you.